Welcome everyone. We'll just allow 30 seconds or so as people start to join the webinar. There's quite a few people flooding in. Okay, I think we'll kick things off. So welcome everyone to our latest webinar around the journey from the World Economic Forum Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics to the ISSB framework. So majority of people on here are current clients of Socialsuite. There's also a few that are not. So for those that are not, obviously Socialsuite, we're a ESG reporting materiality platform provider, working with over 100 clients that are all aligning to the World Economic Forum framework. So, there's a lot of noise out there in the marketplace about upcoming regulations. A lot of companies, what does this mean for us? Should we be aligning to this rather than WEF? So hopefully in today's session that we can add some clarity around this. And to help us do that, we're joined by Dr. Tim Siegenbeek van Heukelom, who is the Chief Impact Officer at Socialsuite, that no doubt a lot of you are familiar with. And then we're also kind of joined by Emily Bayley, who is the head of ESG for the World Economic Forum, who has kindly got up at, I think, 5:50 a.m. in Switzerland, Emily. So, yeah, appreciate you getting up to get in and helping everyone along on this journey. Just as a bit of housekeeping before we hand across, there is a chat box on the right-hand side, which you can see. If anyone's got any questions as we're going along, please feel free just to chuck them in the chat box, and we'll leave a bit of time at the end for the Q&A session to go through those questions. So without further ado, I'd like to hand across to Dr. Tim.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom, for the introduction, and Emily, welcome here. Really a pleasure to have you in the webinar. We'll talk a little bit more about your background in a moment, but I want to start with today is just a real quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. So in the lead up to this, we've had a lot of questions from our customers that are using our platform, and within that, they're reporting on those stakeholder capitalism metrics. And with the launch of that ISSB standard early in the year, and a lot of, like Tom said, a lot of kind of noise in the space, not just voluntary standards, but also regulation coming. There's a lot of maybe anxiety is a big word, but there's definitely a level of that around, where's the world going, what's emerging. So today we really want to focus about talking about that ESG journey. You're reporting on those WEF metrics today. Where are you potentially going to go into the future? Is there a transition required or happening towards the ISSB? What might that look like? So we want to start and talk a little bit about the background to stakeholder capitalism metrics and the global adoption. We'll talk about the WEF-ISSB preparers group, so we'll get into what that is a little bit, unpack that a little bit with Emily. Then talk about the expectations on companies. Are they expected to transition at some point? What would that look like? Is there a timeline? Are there any differences for small or large companies potentially? Key question I've heard as well, some customers really worried about, they think that ISSB is the next standard, so WEF will be phased out overnight, and where does that leave us? So questions around that. Current reporting on that WEF standard, where does that fit into the ISSB? So is there a clear kind of way it slots in, or is it more pieces of the puzzle that you need to disassemble and put at different places? So we'll address that. And then finally, some kind of key steps or considerations that you can take today, think about to just get ready for any potential transition into the future. So there's a whole lot there. We're going to tackle that one step at a time. So we'll have a bit of a conversation. And as Tom mentioned, if you have any questions that you want to be answered today, put them in the chat. The earlier you can do that, the more chance we have to see where we can fit that into the discussion. But also make sure that if you watch the recording of this, if you still have questions that are not answered, just reach out to us. Really important that we can discuss that with you and see what else is on your mind. So first off, Emily, a little bit of background there. You've been with the World Economic Forum for quite a long time in various roles there, but you've played quite a pivotal role in the whole stakeholder capitalism piece there. can you tell us a little bit about, where you kind of, your kind of roles taking you throughout those metrics, and where that has kind of got you today?
Sure, I'm happy to, and thank you for having me, Tim and team. So in short, this work really started, so the forum is a multi-stakeholder platform for collaboration. So we have various communities across the forum that bring topics and agendas forward that the forum kind of establishes initiatives and takes on board to actually drive some action on the topic. So the ask to develop the Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics came from a community of about 120 global CEOs, major multinational companies, who were just overwhelmed with the amount of reporting requirements that they were asked to disclose and report on. Many of them, if we step back even a few years, which seems like a lifetime ago, were voluntary frameworks and standards that their stakeholders, particularly investors, were asking them to report on. And they felt that at the end of the day, this kind of alphabet soup of reporting requirements wasn't actually leading to action and year-over-year improvement, and also providing comparable and consistent disclosure information. So what we did is we took this kind of momentum onto the forum platform. We invited the Big Four audit and accounting firms to work with us because we wanted the outputs of our work to be auditable, capable of assurance, so that they could be included in reporting material, so there's an actionable outcome. We then developed the metrics. We ran them through an extensive stakeholder consultation, and then we put the metrics out into their final form. The metrics, as I think people on the call know, are very much derived from existing frameworks and standards, because we also wanted to show, if we actually take the alphabet soup that was in the marketplace at the time and actually started to put them together, they actually formed the building blocks of what could be a globally aligned system. So then when we asked companies to start voluntarily reporting on that, we're actually signaling to the marketplace and actually showing that if you started to bring the various elements together, such as GRI, SASB, TCFD, and others, you actually had a really good kind of global baseline for what could be a globally aligned system for reporting. So I've been on this journey since we started to develop the metrics. The plan came onto the forum agenda to where we are now with, we'll get to it over the course of the call, our collaboration with the ISSB, our community of practitioners, which I jokingly refer to as our global group therapy community, because you find that no matter where you are in your journey as a reporter, as a strategist in ESG, everyone's kind of challenged with the same issues right now, so you're not alone. So we've also formed a community for that group as well, for the practitioners to understand the guidance we provide, the information we provide, but also to understand that no matter your industry, your geography, your capability and maturity, you're not alone. So I think that's important, and I also want to bring that message to the conversation today.
Excellent. Thanks for that background. And I think it's quite, especially at the time, and still quite a unique approach there to trying to consolidate and harmonize all those voluntary standards. Really kind of the first in the world to do that. So it was really, in that sense, a coup there, that there was like the World Economic Forum just pulled that off and said, here's a consolidated framework that any company, large or small, in a standardized and comparable way can report on. So I think it's really, a big thing to have delivered that. So where do things stand today in terms of the metrics are there? You have the 21 core, the 34 expanded metrics, now the ISSB, who dare to say kind of repeated the exercise in a slightly different way. Would you consider the ISSB like a V2, a second version of the work that the World Economic Forum has done?
I think that's fair to consider ISSB a V2. I mean, in short, when we developed this metrics, we wanted to drive the momentum, to drive stakeholder engagement, to actually drive the system to start to globally align. When we set out on this journey, end of 2019 and early 2020, we knew the forum was not going to be the long-term owner of this work. We knew at the time we had to help develop and build the right organization to own this. So that's why, in parallel to building the metrics and developing this global coalition of companies engaging with us on this, we also worked with the Impact Management Project to bring together the different standard setters. So forgive my alphabet soup, just to list here, but SASB, IARC, CDP, CDSB, and TCFD to really start to show pragmatically how they all help to fill the global building blocks to create the globally aligned system. So a lot of that pre-work the forum collaborated on with the impact management project actually helped to form the foundational kind of structure of the International Sustainability Standards Board. So we did help to contribute to the build of that, including engaging with the IFRS Foundation, inputting into the consultation, being a part of that technical readiness working group, because we knew these standards need to go through the proper standard setting process. They needed to be owned by the right entity that had the mandate to actually really deliver this. So this is indeed version 2 that has definitely gone through the proper standard setting process as a standard setter, as it's now owned by a standard setter. So yes, so we planned from the start to hand it off to someone. It's just that someone didn't exist when we started.
And I think that is exactly the key point I was hoping to get at. It's a natural kind of evolution of what was already on the books there. So there was already that idea, someone needs to spearhead this initiative, start that harmonization process, and the World Economic Forum has really done the legwork and built the fundamentals for the ISSB basically to continue to build on. So I think that's really a very good overview of in only, like you said, it's only a few years, but it looks like a very long time since all this has happened. So with that, a lot of things are happening quite quickly. Things are accelerating. There's a lot happening in the sustainability and ESG space at large. So, and that's why it's really important that we have someone like yourself to help take our customers through that. So with what's going on now, and I think in particular the stakeholder capitalism metrics, looking at the adoption there, and I remember in the first year or so there was quite some communication from the forum as well around adoption by multinationals and large companies. Is there any particular view now at the moment about where the adoption's mostly sitting? Was it mostly multinationals, or have you seen across the whole range to smaller companies? Is there any particular geographic spread of adopters of the stakeholder capitalism metrics? Any insights around that?
Sure. So where we are right now, so we have over 200 multinationals who are partners of the forum, who are engaged in the reporting, who are committed to the metrics. About 160 of them have done the reporting, so the rest are in the process of doing so. Many of them have actually done it for 2 to 3 reporting cycles now. So we're actually seeing that evolution of companies who started by disclosing on maybe just the core metrics, now actually starting to incorporate more of the expanded metrics. So even those companies are kind of on an iterative kind of learning journey as they incorporate more. We also, we've learned over the course of our kind of existence of also different initiatives around the world, like Socialsuite and your community incorporating the metrics and others. Of recent, we've been talking to a number of companies in Middle East or Latin America who are thinking about how do they actually start to on-ramp and work on sustainability reporting and actually start to think about what are material topics they need to disclose on, because historically in the markets they sit in, they've never had either a reporting requirement from the regulator or a strong need from their stakeholders. So we've seen growth recently in those 2 regions, but I would say a lot of the kind of 200 multinationals who've been very close to this work, it's predominantly Europeans, North Americans, and then some Indians, Japanese, and South Korean companies that have been kind of with us since we started this effort.
Excellent. So there's a lot of clarity, I think, then from at least at a multinational level, but there might be pockets of geographically pockets of companies lot smaller than that reporting that might not be on the radar there. So in terms of the adoption there, with the ISSB now publishing their standards mid-year, have you seen, is there any indication of like slowing down in the adoption rate of the stakeholder capitalism metrics, where people feel that like we said, maybe the second version is here now, so we might skip over this or might go straight into that? Or any, do you see any of the multinationals now, are they replacing the stakeholder capitalism metrics I can imagine they have large sustainability teams and I can, shift capacity quite quickly over to that, potentially. But is there any replacement, or is it more of an add-on approach there? Any insights from what you've seen?
Yeah, so the forum, we're not actively recruiting right now for companies to join SCM. I think we would be ignorant if we were doing that, because there is a lot going on in the marketplace, particularly the development of the ISSB standards that came out in June. ISSB standards, they have released the general disclosure requirements and the climate-related disclosure, so S1 and S2. So they don't have yet the full suite of standards. So the companies we've been talking to of recent, their approach has been stakeholder metrics. We're thinking our jurisdiction, or the country we operate in, or companies who we supply to are going to start reporting against ISSB. So we're starting to think, okay, we need to look at ISSB. But because ISSB is not quite yet complete, what can we do? Kind of get a sense of what could be material topics for us. So that's where the SCM is helping to fill that gap, to say, okay, we have elements of planet, we have the general disclosure requirements, but if we want to think about people, principles of governance, and prosperity, which are the other elements of stakeholder metrics, this is a helpful materiality assessment for us to wrap our heads around while we're waiting for the full suite of disclosures. And the other kind of feedback we've received as well is that the European standards are overwhelming to a lot of companies who are particularly just getting a running start, if you will, so that the stakeholder metrics are just a helpful introductory tool for a company that's just getting started to help kind of wrap their heads around what this means. So the usefulness of it has evolved. So it's been very exciting to see just, how that has transitioned to continues to be a useful tool while the global system is essentially being built. Oh, I think we lost Tim, so just hang out here. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them.
I think I'm back now. Sorry, I just lost connection there. Thanks for you. I got most of it. So yeah, on the standards there, I think to your point that most companies now in the marketplace are looking at, ISSB is already there. It's not fully, fully baked yet. There's more to come there. And I think what we've seen as well at Socialsuite is that materiality is extremely important. So we see a lot of our customers really kind of focus on that at the moment. It partly because it really gives you a good overview of what that scope is that you should be reporting on. Partly also because we definitely have customers that have a footprint in Europe where now CSRD requirements, regulation are saying you need to conduct a double materiality assessment. So materiality is a really good, almost like in between there. You can continue your reporting on the stakeholder capitalism metrics. You can work out what is material. You can have a look at what the ISSB has in their first two standards there. So I think that it is an emerging kind of, pathway, an emerging space still, where there's still a lot to come.
Yeah. And just if I can just add one thing, I've spoken to companies in Latin America who have said, we're going to use ISSB standards because we think that's the best way to communicate our alignment to material issues and our progress. And that's the language that our stakeholders understand. we're going to comply with Europe because we have a compliance obligation. But we're still using ISSB because that we think is a clear way to communicate with our stakeholders. So it's also interesting to see just kind of that mindset starting to present itself.
And that is like, and I think that I just saw in the chat as well, like we spoke about the alphabet soup and all the acronyms. At least we're getting to a space now where there's less acronyms now, which is good, I think. There's still a lot of like old ones that have been, absorbed by bodies, but at large, what you'll hear is that the ISSB is really the more, I guess, investor-focused International Sustainability Standards Board, and then the Europeans with their CSRD legislation really, are driving, requirements. So if you do any business in Europe, you'll have to do that, and I think that is the two, and then GRI is a bit more on the European side as well, the Global Reporting Initiative, been around for a long time. So I think that they're the three main ones that people revolve around. There's definitely a lot of like sub-components there. But and I think it's a very good point where people like the language and simplicity and comprehension of the ISSB and the must-do and the must-do of the EU. So there is a combination there, and I think it is promising to see that there's a lot of alignment and a lot of interoperability between those two, standard setters, so to say, happening. So we'll end up ultimately at a point where you do something and that will just cover most of it without having to redo all your efforts.
Yes.
With the stakeholder metrics, so to really get into more of the practicalities there, if you're a company, you're already reporting on some of those 21 metrics or even maybe 34 expanded metrics, you have a selection there that's material you're reporting on, been doing that maybe for a year, 2-3 years now. Is there a very logical way, almost like that you can visualize how that slots into the ISSB? Or is it like at the start, so it's a bit more like it's kind of a puzzle that you need to take the pieces apart and reassemble them when you look at ISSB? So when people think about like the things they're already doing, how neatly will that fit into going forward?
Well, we hope we were. So far so good in terms of alignment. Let's say so. The stakeholder metrics, our planet pillar. The core component of that is TCFD aligned reporting. S2 of ISSB standard is essentially TCFD compliance with TCFD compliance with scope 1, scope 2, and then scope 3 in time. So, we think at least what's come out so far, the puzzle pieces are relatively similar in terms of S2 and what we put together in Planet. And the rest we will really see in terms of general disclosure requirements, which is kind of like the guide to overall reporting and the framing. So the S1, in principle, the positioning is, again, very similar to the stakeholder metrics. So we feel that so far it reiterates kind of how stakeholder metrics can be that version 1 to prepare you for version 2, which will become the standard. So we're kind of putting the pieces together, but there's still more to come with the human capital, human rights, biodiversity, whatever topics come next for us. But so far, I think we've managed well to show that there's alignment and legitimacy of the stakeholder metrics as it's now reflected in standards.
And I think that is really good to, I think very comforting to know that if you're doing a lot of that work now already, it logically flows into either existing the first two requirements under ISSB and any work that is coming there. So I think that is a really good message there, that there is really close eye for that alignment. Now, just before at the end of June this year, the standards were kind of released. But just before that, there was an announcement by both the World Economic Forum and the International Sustainability Standards Board about convening a group of sustainability professionals to really work on sharing best practice, but also the practicalities of adopting the ISSB standards. So I think a lot of our customers are really interested in those, particularly the practicalities there. And like you already flagged, a lot of that still needs to be worked out. But can you tell us a little bit more about that preparers group and who are they, what are they doing, and what can we expect from them? Sure.
So when the ISSB was formed, the forum, we played a role in helping to develop that. And we're one of the many stakeholders who contributed to the development of the ISSB. And we essentially wanted to reaffirm our commitment to helping the institution continue to accomplish their mandate and deliver a set of global sustainability standards. So we put together that MOU. There are three kind of key elements to it. I think the most, for me, exciting is definitely this preparers group. This is essentially a subset of our global practitioners group. So about 20 practitioners who sit across finance, sustainability, legal, and different kind of functions within their organization that have a responsibility for sustainability reporting and are the ones actually doing the preparing. So this is essentially a group we brought together to be a sounding board for the International Sustainability Standards Board technical staff, because we wanted, and they wanted, to have input and understanding from preparers, so the actual users of these standards, to help provide very clear guidance and very clear materials, so that they would be able to clearly then deliver on reporting against the standards. So this group convenes once a quarter essentially and provides input into the ISSB technical documents, work plan, and other activities where they think that a preparer's kind of perspective would be helpful to inform the technical team's responsibility to develop the standards. So we just started. We had our inaugural meeting in October, and this community will continue to provide help and guidance and support. It very much mirrors the work of the International Accounting Standards Board, which also has a preparers group that helps to provide input as the technical team writes and develops standards. So we wanted to make sure that the voice of companies was then, of course, represented by preparing helpful inputs into the Sustainability Standards Board as well.
I think that's really good to hear that there is that group of, like you said, practitioners, but really that voice of the corporate world is really represented in the preparation of the ISSB standards and going forward, and ensuring that any transition pathway there and upcoming standards really align with what is reasonable and feasible for the corporate world at large. Yes, multinationals, but also the smaller companies should not be left behind, and it's good to have like almost an advocacy body there that has a seat at the table. So that's very promising to hear. Yeah. So there's a lot of companies that are considering, that transition or what that pathway would look like. There is, next week I think illustrative guidance is being published. That's I think coming out of the World Economic Forum. Is there anything already, that you can say about that? Like, what can we expect? Will it be a checklist with things to do, or it be more high level statement? Is there any sneak peek you can already share with us around what that guidance might look like?
Sure. If people stop editing and changing words, I can tell you what it'll be, more or less. It's a 4-page guide. One page is the foreword, which outlines the forum's intent. The other 3 are essentially our illustrative guidance that show that transition from stakeholder metrics to the ISSB standards. So as we've kind of mentioned throughout the course of the conversation today, only S1 and S2, the first 2 standards, are published. So the intent is that this document then continually gets updated as new standards are developed. So this document is very much subject to be a living document for the next probably few years as more standards are developed. But part of our MOU with the ISSB is very much that we look to start to sunset the metrics, the stakeholder metrics, as the ISSB standards are developed. Because if you finally have a full version 2, you're not going to be needing version 1 anymore. So we position the stakeholder metrics as an onboarding ramp to get you prepared to help report against the ISSB standards. And this is a guidance document that in very clear language, it shows you how to align what you're doing now to what the ISSB standards propose. And the forward essentially outlines our intent to continuously update this until the full set of standards are out and we've officially sunsetted the stakeholder metrics work.
Excellent. I think that answers a question already there. We had some questions. Will the stakeholder capitalism metrics live indefinitely? Will they be sunset at some point? Well, there's the answer. Yeah. with that, the question there, is there a timeline? I think that will depend on a lot of factors there, but as you mentioned, it will probably be a few years before we get to that point. So, would you say then for most companies, it's not an overnight, urgent matter. It is keep doing what you're doing, keep watching the space, keep, understanding your materiality and what you should be reporting on. And, as the standards are being developed by the ISSB, there will be a logical pathway that you can follow to get closer to that. And at some point, when everything's said and done, move over there. So in that pathway, do you see any difference there for, the multinationals versus smaller companies? Will everyone, find their own pace, or what could that look like?
It's finding your own pace, but then also keeping abreast of what's happening in terms of your reporting requirements in your country. For some countries, and I think Australia included, they're starting to advance on developing bodies to explore how they actually implement ISSB standards. And so there will be guidance probably soon on from what years those will be requirements. We know as well at COP28, a number of countries are going to announce that they're adopting ISSB standards. So the next few weeks will be quite interesting to see how it's all starting to land across the world. But I think not any size company right now is trying to say, where do I need to lean in and put my resourcing on mandatory requirements, and what is kind of voluntary that might be considered repetitive that might not make it as a priority for next year's report. So I think that problem is universal, no matter the size of your company. We've spoken to certainly multinationals who are starting to do away with voluntary because they're preparing for Europe and ISSB. So it all depends on, I think, as you were saying, there are lots of different factors that affect the timeline, but it's resourcing, it's what's mandatory, and it's also what you think is then material for you to maintain. So it's going to be an interesting next few reporting cycles, I think, for many people, as we kind of build the new system and the regime starts to take shape around the world. But so it might not be clear right now, but I think we're on the path to getting clarity. There's light at the ends of the tunnel, I think.
And I think the main point that I think is really spot on there is that while all this is happening, there's a big shift from voluntary reporting to mandatory reporting. And I think that is the key there for companies to really focus on that. A lot of this work, generally we see it spearheaded by the first things that are being regulated is climate, GHG, emissions inventory, risk analysis. But there's a lot of things quite quickly following that. Mm-hmm. And I think the key point there is that whereas the World Economic Forum Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics were voluntary standards, companies could report on it, disclose or explain. We see the ISSB is technically also a voluntary standard, but what regulators are doing are just adopting that. Either like the Canadians are doing direct implementation. I think there's practical alignment in Australia. There's all kind of different ways they phrase it, but the short of it is they're looking at, there's someone here who's developed a really good global sustainability standard. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's adopt that to make sure that we get that global comparability there. So a lot of that reporting there is moving into mandatory reporting. So for companies, I think the key thing here, if there's any action, really keep a close eye on, what is becoming mandatory, put your resources mostly there, and make sure that if you're doing voluntary reporting, that it aligns with anything mandatory, and keep a close eye on, if the ISSB is becoming regulated in your jurisdiction, and keep an eye on what Europe's doing, because that is a key player in that game as well. So I think that was already an answer to one of the final things that we have here to just round up the webinar. While we go through some key actions and preparations, if there are any questions, this is a good time to put them in the chat so we can have a quick look at that in a moment. Any final tips? And I think the tip here already was look at what's mandatory, put your resources where they matter most. What else can you talk us through a little bit here? What could be key things for companies to consider?
Sure. So I think, it's come up a bit on the conversation today, but engaging with your value chain, so your clients, your customers, your suppliers as well, while you may not be required to report against what's mandatory in your jurisdiction, they may have a reporting requirement where they need information from you So particularly for scope 3 for reporting. So there may be needs there. So I think it's helpful to engage, whether it's through the procurement or through even just sustainability departments, to understand what will be the reporting needs. When we talk to multinationals, a lot of what they're focused on right now is stewarding their entire value chain through the reporting requirements and actually providing tools, resources, education, and kind of the capability for those companies to be reported. Because every multinational we talk to, no one wants to change their value chain because of reporting requirements. They want it to stay as it is. They just want everyone to come along with them. So they're really trying to get everyone on board with this, particularly the Europeans that have a lot of reporting requirements coming through across their value chain. So I think that's very important. If you're not doing that already, just keep that in mind, because that's something that may indirectly impact you and create a reporting requirement for you. The other thing, and I think Tim's raised this and we've talked to this, understanding where your country is in terms of ISSB adopting and implementation. We are aware of, I think, about 15 countries at the moment who have undertaken different approaches with their regulators to see how they're going to adopt the ISSB standards. As I mentioned, more will come out. No one's developed yet a helpful tracking tool, so you really have to look at a jurisdictional level to understand what's in play right now, but to understand kind of where your country is headed, and if that's something that's going to be a requirement for you in the near future. And also just to start building your own internal systems and controls. We've done a number of case studies that show the companies that actually start to prepare a few years out, save money, save time, save, and let's say even internal political capital, if they actually start to prepare for these many years in advance rather than waiting until the 11th hour. I think some of the things that are coming through in Europe, there's no choice but to wait for the 11th hour, but there can be some kind of predictive assessment of what you might need to be able to report and actually build those internal systems so you have the information you need to comply with reporting. And then also, I think many companies now, as we mentioned, are starting to look at focusing on what's mandatory versus what they've voluntarily done. So also just helping to prepare your narrative of why you may have changed and what's the rationale, and understanding, making sure that all the stakeholders in your company and your leadership is then aligned to that, and why you've made that shift. Because I think it'll be important, because I think human nature will be to acknowledge that something's been dropped, and then people are going to ask why. So just being prepared to explain why, whatever that explanation is. So, yeah.
Some great points there, and I think they're mostly, I would summarize it as, if you're reporting, keep doing what you're doing, but really keep a close eye on what's happening. Make sure you're well informed what's happening around you from a regulatory point of view in particular, but also start preparing internally in terms of there might be some change there. It's an emerging space there. Plan your narrative around that, and don't expect that you need to change overnight. Everyone's on that journey, whether you're the multinational or the micro cap there. We're all kind of navigating this path. There's no answers, that are set in stone. We'll know that we'll end up, to your point, Emily, there's light at the end of the tunnel. We'll get there in a few years to a really good global comparable sustainability set of reporting standards that everyone's using, hopefully regulated, aligns well with Europe. We're not there yet, so bear with us. We'll help you guide that through. And with that, I want to invite Tom back on stage here to see if there's any questions. And while he does that, really want to thank you already for your insights here. It's been really useful to get your view. You're in the midst of this, breathing this day in, day out, what's going on, the relationship between the forum and the ISSB in terms of what they're doing. And equally, working with all the corporates in terms of what their requirements are, where they want to take things, their insights as well. So I think altogether, it's a really good set to start preparing ourselves. We look forward to the illustrative guidance as like you said, living and breathing document, something that we can, come back to and see, where that's going to take us over the next few years.
Happy to. Yeah, we'll see. We're going to learn together. It's exciting.
Excellent. Thanks
Emily. Yeah, Thanks, Tim. So yeah, I'd just like to welcome anyone, if they've got any questions, just to pop that in the chat. Hopefully that gives people some comfort that it is an evolving space. Socialsuite is going to keep abreast of the changes and the transition, and we will continue to communicate that as best we can to you as well. So if there's no questions, I think someone popped in there about the recording. We will be sending the recording out in an email within the next day or two, so people can recap, send it to colleagues. If you've got any questions, please do feel free to reach out to us as well, or also Emily will pop her details in the follow-up email. With no questions, so we'll wrap up there. Thanks again, Emily, for getting up so early, and as always, Tim, thanks for your time, and thanks for everyone else's time, and be in touch if you have any questions.
Super, thank you. Bye-bye.
See you later.